In a courtroom where the law held sway, "Hey you, get out of the witness area, now," barked Officer Derek Holt, tall, cold, and intimidating. Just before doing the unthinkable, he slapped a middle-aged woman across the face, assuming she was disrupting the trial. He had no idea she was the presiding judge about to oversee his own case. Courtroom 3 of the Claiborne County Courthouse in Georgia was packed on Monday morning. Every seat was taken, and many people stood pressed against the worn wooden walls. It was the usual docket for minor civil infractions, cases that typically wrapped up quickly without much drama. But that morning, something unexpected brought the entire room to a standstill. Naomi Sinclair, the new judge from Massachusetts, entered quietly through a side door, carrying a dark brown case file. She wasn't wearing her judicial robe, as she wasn't scheduled to preside over any hearings that day. Known for her habit of observing and familiarizing herself with the work environment, she often spent the early part of her mornings reviewing procedures in other courtrooms. No one in the room recognized her, except for the court clerk and two attorneys seated near the front row. Naomi made her way toward a row of empty seats near the back of the room. Just as she was about to sit down, a sharp voice rang out. "Hey you, get out of the witness area, now!" It was Officer Derek Holt, the security officer on duty that morning. He was tall, with cold eyes and a face that always seemed tense. Naomi turned calmly and replied, "I'm just looking for an empty seat. There's no sign here that says witness." Derek strode quickly toward her, his voice sharp and irritated. "Who do you think you are? Trying to cause trouble, huh? I told you." Smack! The sound cracked through the heavy silence. Derek's hand had just struck Naomi squarely across the face in front of nearly 80 people. A few in the crowd screamed. A student intern dropped his laptop. The pen in the lead prosecutor's hand rolled onto the floor, and he didn't even attempt to pick it up. Naomi said nothing. She stood upright, her left cheek flushed red. She blinked once, slowly. Her gaze wasn't angry. It was quiet, weighted. Derek took a step back, as if sensing something had gone terribly wrong. "You just assaulted the presiding judge of this courtroom," Naomi said, her voice steady and firm. "I am Judge Naomi Sinclair, and you have just broken the law in the very place you're sworn to protect." The room froze. No one dared to breathe. A second later, phones lit up with recording cameras, reporters from the back rushed forward, and every eye fixed on the two people who had just created the moment that would later be known as a turning point. And this was only the beginning. Naomi Sinclair didn't shout. She didn't lash out. She stood tall like a landmark in a violent storm, her hand calmly smoothing the wrinkle on her blouse caused by the slap. Her eyes didn't meet Holt's with rage, but with the quiet, cold clarity of someone who had just seen through everything. "Officer," her voice rang out, low and steady, "you just assaulted the highest authority in this courtroom." A wave of murmurs shot through the room like electricity. A few people gasped. One man whispered to his friend, "She's the presiding judge? That's her?" A young woman in the back row burst into tears from the tension. The local news camera broadcasting live zoomed in on Holt's pale face. Officer Derek Holt froze, his eyes locked on Naomi in disbelief. His lips twitched as he tried to swallow the rising fear, but he kept his tone gruff. "No badge, no robe. I couldn't have known. You weren't following security protocols." Naomi didn't respond right away. She stepped forward a few paces and pulled a folder from her bag. From it, she took out an official document, her appointment certificate, along with the newly issued judge's ID from the state of Georgia, and held them high for the room to see. She read aloud in a steady, even tone, as if delivering a verdict. "I, Naomi Sinclair, am hereby appointed as judge of the Claiborne County Court effective June 1st under Executive Order 349928G, signed by the Governor of Georgia, effective immediately." She paused, her eyes locked on Holt. Then she gave the order. "Chief of Court Security, under Section 17-3.1 of the Georgia Criminal Code, I hereby order the arrest of Officer Derek Holt for assaulting a judicial officer in the execution of their duties." The room fell completely silent. The chief, an older man with a tense expression, stepped forward and looked at Naomi as if confirming one last time. "Your order is entered into the official record," he said quietly, then turned to Holt. "You are required to surrender your weapon and leave this courtroom in custody." Holt recoiled. "What? This is a mistake." But it was too late. Two security officers approached. One restrained Holt's arms while the other unfastened his duty belt. The rare scene prompted many in the gallery to pull out their phones and start recording. Holt was led away, his face a mix of fury and humiliation. Naomi remained standing at the center of the courtroom, not like someone who had just been insulted, but like a storm beginning to tear through a system that had long believed itself untouchable. And the real battle was only just beginning. The atmosphere in the Claiborne County courtroom felt compressed, as if the very air had thickened. People held their breath, watching every step taken by Judge Naomi Sinclair, a black woman of Caribbean descent who had just had a white police officer handcuffed on his own turf. But Naomi didn't stop there. In a firm voice, she cited Section 24-9.4 of the Georgia State Code. In the event of unlawful conduct occurring within the courtroom, a judge has the authority to convene an emergency hearing, conduct immediate examination to establish facts, and safeguard the integrity of the judicial process. She declared an on-the-spot hearing, instructing all witnesses to remain seated and the media to stay live on air. Because this, she said, is not just an assault. This is an affront to the very justice system in which you've placed your trust. The local news camera, originally there to film a routine property dispute, had now switched to special coverage. The headline flashing on screen read, "Breaking. New judge assaulted in courtroom, emergency hearing underway." Naomi instructed the chief court officer to hand over all footage and body cam recordings related to Holt for investigative purposes. She stated clearly, if the camera recorded it, then justice demands the full truth, uncut, unburied in some internal file. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Holt, now seated off to the side, his hands loosely cuffed. "There isn't any," Holt said after a brief pause, his voice flat. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "My body cam today wasn't on. I didn't activate it. I didn't think I'd need it." A murmur spread like wildfire. A woman in the press row whispered, "This is how they always get away." Another reporter quickly typed, "Officer Holt admits no recording on the day he assaults a judge." Naomi's expression remained composed, but her gaze cut through the thick fog of excuses. "So you entered a courtroom armed, assaulted someone whose identity you didn't verify, and failed to activate your mandatory recording device." Holt pressed his lips together and said nothing. Naomi turned to the court clerk and ordered a transcript of Holt's statement, the sealing of courtroom surveillance footage, and all media video. She directed the court to immediately file an internal investigation request with the state attorney general's office. Holt's slap had been the spark, but his words, no body cam, were the true ignition, lighting up a system already riddled with rot and now with nowhere to hide. Naomi knew full well, she wasn't just confronting one officer. She was confronting the darkness embedded deep within the framework of local justice, and she wasn't backing down. Less than 24 hours after the emergency hearing at the Claiborne County Courthouse, the first report from the internal investigation landed on Judge Naomi Sinclair's desk. The cold, clinical lines confirmed what no one wanted to believe. East Corridor Security Camera, site of the incident, ceased operation from 9:36 to 09:46 a.m. No footage from that 10-minute window was recorded. That was precisely when Officer Derek Holt entered the courtroom, clashed with Naomi, and carried out the assault, a coincidence far too convenient to accept. Naomi set the report down. She didn't need anyone to say it. She knew this wasn't just a technical glitch. She'd seen these kinds of perfectly timed malfunctions far too often in her 30 years in the legal field. Meanwhile, the media had begun to circle. The story of an officer slapping a judge was no longer an isolated incident. It was fanning the flames of public suspicion about cover-ups and data manipulation within Claiborne's law enforcement agencies. A local radio station received an anonymous call. The voice was deep, blunt, and unmistakably from someone inside the system. This isn't the first time Holt's done this. He punched a young black man at the market just for talking back. No charges filed because the camera wasn't working. Then there was the incident behind the theater. Camera couldn't connect. How many times has this happened, and people still pretend not to see? The caller hung up immediately, but that was all it took for the newsroom to pivot. Headlines began shifting rapidly. System failure or sabotage. Officer Holt's dark history, just the tip of the iceberg. Camera disconnects for 10 minutes. Claiborne demands answers. Naomi saw the headlines while sitting in her office. She wasn't pleased, but she wasn't surprised either. What troubled her was the question, what if Holt wasn't just a rogue officer? And she was right. That afternoon, an unmarked folder was left at the courthouse. Inside were copies of 2 internal reports from 2018 and 2021, both concerning unnecessary use of force by Holt. Both concluded insufficient evidence due to lack of video. Naomi held the stack of papers, feeling her hands tremble, not from fear, but from rage. This time there was no missing video. This time there were witnesses. And this time, the person slapped wasn't someone easy to forget. She took a deep breath and looked out the window toward the police station in the distance. She knew a thin layer of dust had just been wiped from a much deeper crack. And if Holt had protection, that crack was about to split wide open. Naomi Sinclair didn't come to Georgia to bow her head, certainly not to serve as window dressing for a system rotting from the roots. The morning after the camera malfunction story dominated statewide broadcasts, she submitted a 37-page document to the Georgia State Judicial Committee. Its contents sent shockwaves through the legal community. A proposal to temporarily suspend the legal standing of 124 criminal cases from 2014 to 2023, in which Officer Derek Holt was directly involved in the arrest or testimony. The list was categorized by severity, with a separate column marked involving Black or minority individuals, making up 87% of the total. Naomi didn't accuse, yet. She didn't claim all the cases were unjust, but she posed a crucial question. If someone with a history of concealing body cam footage, repeatedly using excessive force, and being tied to disconnected cameras was involved in 124 cases, can we truly call the system fair? That question didn't just shake the community. It rocked the Georgia Judicial Committee. Half of the members supported her, mostly younger, progressive ones, or those who had previously called for reform in the justice system. They saw this as an opportunity to clean up the past and restore public trust. The other half did not. A senior member, Judge Preston Wexley, a 68-year-old white man, spoke up in a closed session. We cannot let an outsider, someone who doesn't understand Georgia's culture, turn the entire system into a political battleground. Another, younger but influential in the legal community, mocked her on live television. I'm not saying Naomi Sinclair is wrong. I'm just saying it's a bit of a coincidence that she wants to reopen 120 old cases, right when an officer mistakenly slapped her. The news divided the public. Some called her a champion against abuse of power. Others said she was exploiting racial emotions to elevate her political career. Naomi read those comments in the evening, sitting alone in her office. Her tea had gone cold on the table, but her gaze was still hot as fire. She knew exactly what they would call her to overshadow the core question. If we're too afraid to revisit the truth, does justice truly exist? And she also knew. Behind every case was a person, a family. A life that might have been derailed by a ruling from someone abusing their power. She didn't come to Georgia to please anyone. She came to do what needed to be done. Less than 72 hours after Judge Naomi proposed reviewing 124 cases, a headline appeared on the front page of the Georgia Tribune. Naomi Sinclair was investigated for civil rights violations in Maryland, documents kept hidden for years. The headline shattered Georgia. The late-night commentary show on Channel 5 began with a sarcastic introduction. Is the whistleblower hiding a less-than-spotless past? An ethics investigation was immediately launched against Naomi. This time, not by the Georgia Judicial Committee, but by a special federal committee, formed urgently at the request of 2 state senators, both of whom had received support from local police unions. The accusation? In a case in Baltimore 7 years ago, Naomi, then a prosecutor, was accused of refusing to review video evidence favorable to the defendant, and only agreed to drop the charges after pressure from a local human rights organization. Naomi did not deny the incident, but she would not let anyone twist the truth. At a press conference, she stared directly into the camera. I apologized to that young man, and I made it right. But if one mistake, one that I publicly took responsibility for, is being used to silence me while I expose a corrupt system, then the question is not whether I was right or wrong. The question is, who is so afraid of the truth? But the media didn't need reasoning. They only needed conflict. The hashtag Remove Judge Naomi quickly climbed to the top of Twitter, fueled by a flurry of anonymous accounts. Some even dug up old personal photos of Naomi, accompanied by venomous comments about her Caribbean roots. But at the same time, another wave emerged: Stand with Naomi. Civil rights organizations, law school alumni, and young judges across the country posted in support. A former defendant, the very person Naomi had dropped charges against, posted a video saying, "I forgive her, not because she's perfect, but because she didn't run, she didn't deny it, and now she's courageously standing against what I once was a victim of." Naomi knew that from now on, every step she took would be under scrutiny. Any statement could be edited, twisted. Those against her didn't need the truth. They only needed doubt. But she also understood if someone like Holt could exist in the system for decades, then being investigated just days after speaking out was the clearest answer to the level of corruption she was facing. And she wouldn't back down. In front of dozens of camera lenses at a spontaneous press conference held right outside the Fulton County Courthouse, a young woman stood up, her hand trembling as she held a microphone. She wore a white shirt, her long, dark brown hair tied neatly at the back of her neck, and her voice, though quiet, rang out like a sharp blow amid the noisy atmosphere. "My name is Isabella Marquez. I'm 27 years old. I'm a night nurse at a nursing home south of Atlanta, and I was unlawfully detained by Officer Holt last March." The room fell silent. Reporters raised their cameras, snapping photos in rapid succession. She explained, that night, Isabella was driving home after her shift, still in her medical uniform. When she stopped at a red light at a quiet intersection, Holt signaled for her to pull over for suspicious behavior. He didn't call for backup, nor did he read her Miranda rights. He pulled her from the car, handcuffed her, and took her to the station on charges of resisting arrest. At the station, I cried and said I hadn't done anything wrong. He just laughed. I remember every word he said. "You think you're different from them? You're an immigrant too. Don't play the good girl." Isabella was held for 19 hours without a lawyer, without the ability to make a call. The next morning, she was quietly released. No paperwork, no explanation, no record. People told me to stay quiet, that I wouldn't win against the system. But the day Judge Naomi was slapped, I realized if she can stay calm and stand her ground, then I have to speak up. She opened her phone. In front of the cameras, Isabella played an audio recording that she had secretly captured from the patrol car. The small phone she had hidden in her jacket pocket had fallen out and recorded the entire conversation through the open car window. In the recording, Holt's voice was clear. "Valid papers? I don't need papers. You women showing up here was the mistake." There was silence after the recording ended. Only the sound of camera shutters clicked rapidly, like hailstones. Naomi, standing in the crowd, didn't speak, but she nodded slightly at Isabella, a small nod, as if the two women on opposite ends of the power scale had just found each other in the same fight. Only hours later, Judge Naomi's lawyer filed a motion to reopen all the records of Holt's arrests from the past 5 years that lacked proper documentation. And for the first time, the list was long enough to make a state legislator exclaim, "We don't just have a rogue officer, we have an entire system that's been poisoned." Shortly after Isabella's shocking testimony, a nearly 5,000-word article appeared on the front page of the Southern Observer, an independent investigative newspaper based in Atlanta. The author was Malik Avery, a veteran African-American journalist who had been arrested by the police 10 years ago on suspicion of subversive activity and had dedicated his career to tracing the tracks of shadow power alliances. The article began with a succinct statement. Officer Derek Holt is not a lone wolf. He is a product nurtured by a system of calculated protection and cover-up. Malik wasn't speaking lightly. Over the past 2 weeks, he had been tracking the flow of money from a legal defense fund called the Blue Shield Initiative, a group that funds legal fees and media campaigns for officers under investigation for misconduct. In the 2022 financial records that Malik had obtained, Blue Shield received over $850,000 from two primary sources, a private security company named SentryCorps Security and a political action committee, P, sponsored by none other than Savannah's mayor, Gerald Vance. Malik wrote, "Whenever an officer like Holt is under investigation, this fund steps in to cover lawyer fees, hire people to write defense pieces, and run TV ads about the societal risk of lawlessness if police are handcuffed. But what they don't make public is this. Sentry Corps is a contractor for the city's public works projects, appointed by the mayor without a bidding process." Everything began to fall into place. Holt, an officer with a thick disciplinary record, was still promoted. The investigations with lost files, the cameras accidentally malfunctioning, the reports with illegible signatures, and now all of it led to one fund, one that no one had suspected, that was legalizing political campaign donations as law enforcement protection. The slap to Judge Naomi was no longer a personal blow. It was a broken link in a tangled web of interests where police protect contractors, contractors fund politicians, and politicians in return use their power to continue covering up. On local television, a commentator exclaimed, "The question is no longer whether Holt is guilty. The question is how many people are thriving because they've covered up Holt's wrongdoings." On the same day, Judge Naomi officially filed a motion for the federal courts to investigate the Blue Shield Initiative and the connections between the police, the government, and businesses. The heat of the case forced the Savannah mayor's office to release a press statement. But in that statement, the only thing they didn't mention was the name of Officer Holt. Judge Naomi Sinclair stepped up to the podium at an unprecedented press conference, not to defend herself, but to set conditions with the entire system of which she was a part. Her voice calm, her gaze direct as she looked into the dozens of cameras pointed at her, she said, "If the investigations are not made public, if there is no independent oversight, I will step down. I refuse to play a decorative role in a rotting system." The words rang out like thunder. On social media, a clip of that statement alone reached over 6 million views within 36 hours. But just as people were debating whether Naomi was merely making a threat or genuinely planning to resign, she delivered a second blow, this time not with words, but with evidence. At the press conference, she unveiled a 47-page file containing internal emails between prosecutors and the police department. At least 4 prosecutors, 2 of whom were still in office, had actively declined to prosecute cases related to Holt, even though there was enough evidence to charge. One notable email revealed a prosecutor writing, "If these cases go to court, Holt is finished, and I'm not sure I'll last until the next election either." The press immediately dubbed Naomi as the time bomb of the judiciary, not because she had exploded, but because she was forcing the entire system to count down. That same day, the district prosecutor's office issued a statement denying any wrongdoing and accusing Naomi of acting as a political activist disguised as a judge. But the public response was different. The hashtag Truth with Naomi spread at lightning speed, and for the first time, more than a dozen sitting judges from other states publicly voiced their support for her. Amid the media storm, the Georgia State Office announced the formation of a special committee to thoroughly review the allegations. But Naomi didn't stop there. She sent the files directly to the Federal Department of Justice, demanding an independent investigation to avoid any interference from local agencies. At the same time, an insider leaked to the press that an unofficial order had come from the top instructing to contain the influence of Judge Sinclair. From someone who had been slapped, Naomi had become a direct threat to a power structure that seemed untouchable. And that evening, Naomi's phone rang. On the other end was the sheriff of the neighboring county, someone she had never met. His voice lowered. "I just got word. Someone's been following your granddaughter. Be careful, Judge. You're flipping the whole chessboard." The courtroom that day wasn't as crowded as when Naomi Sinclair first walked in and was slapped, but the atmosphere was much heavier, as if everyone knew something bigger was about to happen. In the front row, Officer Derek Holt, now wearing an orange prison jumpsuit, sat with his head bowed, hands cuffed. Behind him stood 3 federal agents. The investigation had concluded. Holt was charged with assaulting a law enforcement officer, abuse of power, and deliberately tampering with evidence in multiple cases. All of this was evidence Naomi had helped expose, but she wasn't there to witness the verdict. In her small office at the courthouse, Naomi was packing away books, files, family photos, and the potted plants she had cared for herself. The door gently opened. Julia, the Asian American second-year law student intern, stood there, holding an unfinished file. Judge Sinclair, are they really saying you're leaving? Her voice trembled. Naomi smiled, sitting down in the chair as if it were the first time she had guided Julia in writing a case summary. She placed her hand on the file, looking directly at the young woman who had witnessed everything from day one. I'm not seeking justice for myself. I just want you to know, don't be afraid when the truth has the power to change the whole system. There were no applause. No one stood to send her off with titles or praise. But those words, that final statement, were recorded and spread across law student forums, small courtrooms, and professional ethics lectures. Naomi did not become the kind of symbol the media often likes to build. She did not run for office, sign a memoir deal, or become a speaker. She moved to a small town near the sea where she once said, "Only the waves are fair to everyone." But the legacy she left was far from quiet. Nearly a year later, Georgia state law was amended to mandate the use of body cameras and the storage of data in the federal system. 3 prosecutors had to resign, and Julia, the intern from that year, became one of the most prominent public defenders in the state of her generation. She still keeps a photo of Naomi walking away from the courthouse with just one line written underneath. She didn't need to win to do what was right. Naomi's story did not end with applause. It ended with a silence of deep respect, the kind of silence that only comes when one faces the truth, unglamorous but undeniable.
Oh, if you're still here and you've listened to the end of the story, thank you, really. Because some stories aren't told to win over anyone or to expose anyone, but to understand the heart of people. Judge Naomi didn't stay to receive applause. She left in silence, as if to remind us of one thing. Justice doesn't always have a happy ending, but the truth, if we dare stand by it, will never be meaningless. Sometimes you might be the only one in the room brave enough to say, "This is wrong." And sometimes the price you pay is your career, your reputation. But because of that, young women like Julia come to believe that they can change something, not by shouting, but by being resilient, bit by bit. So if today you see any injustice, even if it's small, don't turn away. Because who knows, maybe you are the one the system is waiting for, to fix it, piece by piece, just like Naomi did. And remember, courage doesn't need to be loud.